The camera on my cell phone shook slightly as I adjusted the position for the video call. It was something we often did, small gestures to maintain the connection, even on busy days. Today, however, there was something different. Her voice sounded rushed, the words flowed too quickly, as if there was an inexplicable rush to end the call. "Is everything all right in there?" I asked, my curiosity accompanied by a slight discomfort. "Yes, just a bit of a mess. I'm finishing some things at home." The answer came with a forced naturalness, but I ignored it. It wasn't unusual for her to be busy. I trusted her. But fate has a cruel way of revealing what we'd rather not see. At the back of the room, behind her, a figure crossed the screen. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a reflection. But there was no ignoring the movement. Something inside me crashed. "Who's there?" My voice sounded firmer than I'd expected, even with the whirlwind that was beginning to form in my chest. She hesitated, a fatal mistake. The silence screamed louder than any hasty explanation I could offer. "Nobody. You must be seeing things." The smile she tried to force didn't reach her eyes. And then the figure appeared again, this time more clearly. It was a man. Tall. Comfortable. Walking through my living room. Through our living room. I couldn't breathe. "Are you going to tell me who he is, or am I going to have to find out for myself?" The question came out as a challenge, a mixture of incredulity and anger. "You're exaggerating, love. There's no one here." The defensive tone was enough to confirm my suspicions. I knew that once the truth was told, there would be no going back. The trust we had built up over the years was about to crumble with the force of a house of cards in a hurricane. I stopped the call abruptly. There was nothing more to say. I needed time. I needed answers. And, above all, I needed to control the chaos that was already threatening to overtake me. For hours, I stared at my cell phone screen, my reflection staring back at me, as if waiting for me to make a decision I never imagined I would have to make. However, the worst thing was not what I saw, but what I felt. The crushing weight of betrayal robbed me of air, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the scene repeating itself, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Memories of the past invaded my mind, moments when I had trusted blindly, words of love that now sounded hollow. And I wondered, how many of those words were lies? The silence in the apartment became unbearable. I picked up the phone again and dialed her number. She answered, and the sound of her voice was a knife in my chest. "I'm going home now." My words were more of a declaration than a warning. "Now?" "Why?" "There's no need for that. We can talk later." She tried to argue, but I already knew the truth. Trying to postpone the inevitable only increased my anger. When I got to the door, the atmosphere seemed different. It was the same house, but there was something off, as if the air carried the weight of guilt. And then I saw her. She was sitting on the sofa, trying to look casual, but the glint of nervousness in her eyes gave everything away. Who was he? My voice sounded calmer than I expected, but every word was charged with intensity. "I want the truth." She hesitated again, but this time she knew there was nowhere to run. "It's not what you think. He's just here to pick up some things. He's a friend. A friend who walks around our living room like he owns it." My question made her look away. "How long has this been going on?" "Nothing's happening. You're making things up in your head." The insistence on the lie was like a sharp blade, cutting through any remnants of hope I might have had. "His name." I was direct, blunt. "If you don't tell me, I'll find out. And when I do, it'll be worse." She sighed deeply, and at that moment, I saw the wall of defense begin to crumble. "I didn't want you to find out like that. But I did." My words were harsh, but what emotional control I had left was starting to slip. "How long?" Repeating the question was yet another attempt to maintain some sanity in the midst of the chaos. A few months. The confession was a shot. Months. While I was working, while I was building a future for us, she was building something with someone else. What comes after a betrayal isn't just pain. It's the loss of self, of ground, of identity. Her every word, her every tear was a reminder that everything I knew was falling apart. Yet, at the same time, something new was growing inside me. An urgent need to rebuild myself, to show her, and myself, that I wasn't just the betrayed man. But the story didn't end there. There were more truths to be revealed, more pieces to fit together, and a final decision that would change the course of everything. What would I do with the betrayal? Who would I become after that? And, above all, what would happen to her and him when the tables were turned? Welcome to the channel. Here, we neither condone nor support any form of betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but they carry a powerful message, to show how betrayal can destroy lives, families and loves. Get ready for an intense narrative, full of twists and turns, which will make you reflect on choices and consequences. Take a deep breath, because the story that follows will shock you. Have a good listen. In the dim light of the living room, Lucas was arranging the papers for an important presentation he was to give the next morning. It was his usual routine, spending a few hours organizing work details while trying to enjoy the silence of the night. The atmosphere carried a tranquility that he valued, but which sometimes seemed to be charged with something deeper, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Next to him, in the kitchen, Emma was preparing a cup of tea, a habit she cultivated to relax before bed. They had been married for 8 years. They met at a university conference, when both were still immersed in professional dreams and hopes of a bright future. Lucas, with his methodical personality and sharp sense of humor, had won Emma over with ease. She, on the other hand, brought a light and contagious energy, the kind of person who made any environment seem more alive. The house they lived in reflected the balance they had built up over the years. Hand-picked details, such as the frames with travel photos or the neutral colors of the walls, revealed the harmony they believed they shared. Emma loved the kitchen, and Lucas spent more time in the office. They respected each other's spaces, an unspoken rule that seemed to work. But over the last few months, something invisible seemed to have settled between them. It wasn't open conflict or bitter words, it was more like an absence. Lucas, often consumed by work, spent less and less time paying attention to Emma. On the other hand, she seemed distant and her laughter no longer had the same spontaneity. The routine that once connected them now seemed to separate them. Emma was the kind of woman who liked details. She noticed when Lucas changed his perfume or adjusted the tone of his voice when talking to an important client on the phone. And that's what started to worry her. It wasn't something he did, but something he no longer did. The curious glances, the spontaneous touches, the late-night conversations had become rare. She tried to justify it to herself, it was the work, the pressure, the life they had built. But justifications didn't fill the emptiness she felt. Lucas, for his part, sensed that something was wrong, but he didn't know how to name it. He noticed Emma's smiles were less frequent, the sparkle in her eyes a little dimmer. But instead of confronting her, he took refuge in his work. It was a mechanism he had learned from his father: if something is broken, it's better to let it go than to face it. He thought Emma needed space, that maybe she was just going through a phase. The nights in the house were silent. The sound of the kettle on the stove or the pages of a book being turned was all that filled the room. Lucas would occasionally try to bring up something trivial, like work or a TV program, but Emma's answers were short. "I'm tired" was the most common excuse. And he, not knowing how to break the barrier, would simply accept it. Despite this, there were times when things seemed normal. Like when they cooked together on Emma's birthday, laughing at a sauce that went wrong, or when they went through old photos to decide which ones to put in the new frame Lucas had bought. These moments were like little glimpses of what they had been before, but they disappeared quickly, like vapor. The couple's circle of friends was small. They had few visitors, except for Anna, Emma's best friend, who often dropped by for coffee and to discuss work plans. Anna had always been a constant presence in Emma's life, but even she noticed that something was different. "Are you all right?" she asked once, while they were drinking wine on the terrace. Emma hesitated before replying, "Yes, I'm just a bit overwhelmed with everything." Emma did, however, have her own space. She liked to walk through the park next to the house, listening to music that reminded her of simpler times. It was a way to escape, to organize her thoughts. There, she felt free, even if only for a short time. During these walks, she sometimes thought about Lucas, how he had been her anchor for so long, but also how he seemed to have become something more distant, almost unreachable. Lucas, on the other hand, had his own refuge, the office. There, he felt in control, with graphs, spreadsheets and reports that followed a clear logic, unlike the emotional turmoil that seemed to be brewing at home. But as the days went by, he began to realize that even work couldn't completely distract his mind. There was something he needed to face, but he didn't know where to start. One particularly quiet night, while Emma was in her room, Lucas took out his cell phone and started looking through old photos in the album. There they were, younger, more carefree, smiling for the camera at distant beaches or impromptu dinners. The contrast with the present hit him like a blow. What had happened to that couple? Emma, for her part, sat on the bed and stared into the void. That night, she realized that she no longer knew what to say to Lucas. It wasn't that there were no words, but that the words that really mattered seemed stuck somewhere deep inside, a place she didn't know how to access. The silence that united them in that house was almost deafening, but neither of them knew how to break it. They both felt it, but neither said it. It was as if they were stuck on opposite sides of a river, trying to reach each other but not knowing how to swim. The days went by as if an invisible timer was counting down something about to explode. Lucas and Emma continued to move around the house, sharing the same space but living different realities. He tried to lose himself in his work, while she kept her face serene, hiding an inner turmoil. The silence between them was no longer a comfortable emptiness, but a suffocating tension, like a thread about to break. A Friday night brought an attempt to get closer. Lucas arrived home early, carrying a bottle of wine and flowers. He had decided, after weeks of hesitation, that he had to try something. All along, he had felt something slipping through his fingers, but he didn't know how to hold on to it. The flowers were a simple gesture, but loaded with intentions. He put the bottle on the table and went to Emma, who was in the bedroom. "I thought we could have dinner together tonight," he said, trying to sound casual. Emma looked at him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sure, that sounds like a good idea." During dinner, they talked about amenities. Lucas told a story about work, something that would normally make Emma laugh. But that night, she just nodded, her gaze distracted. Lucas didn't insist. Despite his best efforts, the gulf between them seemed wider than ever. Later that evening, Lucas was in the office revising a contract. He noticed that Emma's cell phone had been left on the dining table. Without thinking, he picked it up to take it to her, but when he unlocked the screen to let her know, something caught his eye. A message notification appeared at the top, coming from a number he didn't recognize. For a moment, he thought about ignoring it. But something inside him stopped him. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." His heart began to race and a feeling of unease overtook his body. He opened the conversation, not knowing exactly what he was expecting to find, but the words there hit him like an avalanche. They were intimate exchanges, full of little secrets and codes that he didn't understand, but which were enough to know that Emma was involved with someone else. Lucas's mind went into a whirl. He wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers, but he also knew he needed to have more information. Taking a deep breath, he put his cell phone back on the table and returned to his office. He spent the rest of the night going over possibilities, remembering small details that had seemed insignificant before, but which now took on a completely different weight. The next day, Lucas decided not to mention what he had discovered. Instead, he began to pay attention to Emma's every move. He noticed how she checked her cell phone more often than usual, how she smiled at the screen in a way she hadn't done for a while. The walks in the park, once apparently innocent, now seemed part of a carefully thought-out plan. On Monday, Lucas made a decision. He left work early and drove to the park where Emma used to walk. He stayed in the car, watching from a distance, his heart racing. A few minutes later, she appeared. She was wearing a light jacket and seemed to be talking on the phone, laughing at something Lucas couldn't hear. He waited, motionless, while Emma approached a man who was sitting on a nearby bench. The two greeted each other with a hug that lasted a little longer than necessary, and then they started walking together. Lucas felt a tightness in his chest, but remained in the car. There was something surreal about watching this, as if he were seeing someone else's life, not his own. He continued to watch as Emma and the man walked through the park, laughing and chatting with a familiarity that made him feel like an intruder. After a while, the two said goodbye, and Emma went home. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. The image of Emma with another man was engraved in his mind, every detail replaying over and over again. He wondered how it had happened, where he had failed, what he could have done differently. But at the same time, he felt a growing anger, an indignation that made him want to act. The next few days were an exercise in self-control. Lucas pretended not to know anything, while Emma carried on with her routine, unaware that she was being watched. He began to notice other patterns, the more frequent outings, the unconvincing excuses. And with each detail, his anger grew. One evening, while Emma was in the shower, Lucas picked up her cell phone again. He needed more information, something that would confirm his suspicions definitively. This time, he found photos. They were pictures of them together, their smiles complicit, affectionate gestures that he had previously believed were reserved only for him. The photos were the final proof that Emma was involved with another man. Lucas put his cell phone back and left the house. He drove aimlessly, trying to process everything he had discovered. He felt betrayed, humiliated and, above all, lost. The memories of the years they had spent together now seemed distant, almost unreal. He wondered how Emma had been able to do it, how she had hidden it so well. When he returned home, he found Emma asleep. He looked at her for a long time, trying to recognize the woman he had fallen in love with. But all he saw was a stranger, someone who had destroyed what they had built together. The next morning, Lucas decided he couldn't pretend any longer. He needed to confront her, to hear the truth from her lips, even if it destroyed him even more. While Emma was having coffee in the kitchen, he approached her, placing her cell phone on the table. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice firm but charged with emotion. Emma looked at him in surprise, but said nothing. The silence that followed was deafening, each second stretching out like an eternity. Finally, she sighed and looked away. "I can explain." Lucas crossed his arms, waiting. "Then explain." The air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. Emma began to speak, hesitantly, but every word that came out of her mouth was like a stab. The justifications, the excuses, everything seemed empty to Lucas. He wanted answers, but the answers didn't bring relief. They only confirmed what he already knew: Emma had chosen someone else. As she spoke, Lucas felt a mixture of anger and sadness take over. He knew that this was only the beginning. The betrayal was just the surface of something much bigger, something he still didn't fully understand, but which was about to be revealed. Lucas felt like his world had been turned upside down. Emma's betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was a brutal, naked reality that he had to face. Her explanations during her confession were vague and defensive, but there was something in her posture, in the way she avoided looking directly at him, that indicated it wasn't just regret. It was fear. Lucas knew there was something more, something she still didn't have the courage to say. In the days that followed, Emma seemed restless. She avoided long conversations and her actions were careful, as if she were treading on minefields. Lucas, on the other hand, watched everything in silence. He didn't know what he was in for, but he was sure that the worst was yet to come. He followed her with his eyes as she moved around the house, the tension evident in the way she held her cell phone closer to her or checked the front door more often than usual. On Friday evening, Emma finally broke the silence. They sat on the sofa, both too tired to continue pretending that everything was normal. Lucas was staring at the coffee table, his mind wandering between old memories and the devastating present, when she spoke. "I need to tell you something." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but laden with weight. Lucas raised his eyes slowly, waiting for her to continue. He knew this conversation would be crucial, but he had no idea how it would end. Emma took a deep breath, her eyes watering, but not shedding any tears. "The man you saw, who I was with," she hesitated, swallowing the words as if they were poison. "He's not just someone I got involved with. There's more." Lucas felt his heart racing, anger and fear intertwining in a tight knot in his stomach. "Just say it, Emma. I don't have any more patience for beating around the bush." She ran her hands through her hair nervously before finally confessing. "He's someone I've known for a long time. Before we even started dating." Lucas frowned, confused. "And what does that mean? Who is he?" Emma looked away, her face pale. "He's someone you know too." The pause was long enough for Lucas to feel the tension turn into something almost unbearable. "He's your brother." For a moment, her words made no sense. It was as if Lucas' brain refused to process what he had just heard. "What?" The word came out as a whisper, laden with disbelief. "That's it." Emma finally found the courage to look at him, her eyes full of guilt. "Gabriel and I had an affair. I didn't plan it to be like this. I swear I didn't plan it." Lucas got up from the sofa, his breathing heavy. He started pacing the room, trying to find logic in something that seemed completely absurd. Gabriel, his younger brother, had been a constant presence in his life. Although they had opposite personalities, Gabriel had always been more impulsive, more daring. Lucas had never imagined that he would be capable of something like this. "That doesn't make sense, Emma." Lucas stopped walking and turned to her, his eyes burning with anger. "Why? How did it happen?" Emma tried to explain, but her words came out slurred. "I was lost, Lucas. I felt so far away from you. And when Gabriel started showing up more, it was a moment of weakness. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about you." "Weakness?" Lucas exploded, his voice echoing around the room. "Weakness is something that lasts for a moment, Emma. This was premeditated. It was planned. You had meetings, conversations, lies. That wasn't weakness. It was betrayal, in the worst possible way." She started to cry, but Lucas didn't feel sorry. Not at that moment. He was consumed by anger, by the feeling that his whole life had been built on lies. What about him? What does Gabriel have to say about that? Did he feel weak too? Emma didn't answer. She knew there was nothing she could say to ease the pain Lucas was feeling. He was a practical man, who always tried to solve problems logically, but this problem had no easy solution. Lucas took his car keys and left the house without saying another word. He drove aimlessly, Emma's words echoing in his mind like a cruel mantra. "Your brother." It was more than he could bear. Every childhood memory, every shared conversation, now seemed contaminated. He parked in a secluded spot and stayed in the car, his head resting on the steering wheel. Tears began to flow, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were of frustration, of anger, of an overwhelming sense of betrayal. After a while, he picked up his cell phone and, with trembling hands, called Gabriel. The call rang several times before being answered. "Lucas, it's late. What's wrong?" Gabriel's voice sounded normal, almost relaxed, which only increased Lucas's fury. We need to talk. Now. Now. What happened? You know exactly what happened. I know about you and Emma. On the other end of the line, the silence was deafening. Finally, Gabriel answered, his voice lower, more tense. Can we meet to talk? Lucas hung up without answering. He knew where Gabriel lived and drove straight there. When he arrived, he found his brother standing in the doorway, looking as uncomfortable as Emma had earlier. Lucas got out of the car and walked over to him, his fists clenched. Do you have anything to say before I go in and sort this out some other way? Lucas asked, his voice cold. Lucas, I'm sorry. Gabriel sounded sincerely sorry, but that meant nothing to Lucas. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake. A mistake. Lucas laughed bitterly. You slept with my wife, Gabriel. You lied to me. That's more than a mistake. That's a choice. Gabriel didn't try to defend himself. He knew there was no justification for what he had done. Lucas took a step back, taking a deep breath to control the urge to do something he might regret later. You've lost any respect I had for you, Gabriel. And I'm going to make sure you understand the impact of that. Not just on my life, but on yours too. Without waiting for an answer, Lucas got back into his car and drove off. He knew that this moment was only the beginning. There were more questions to be asked, more truths to be revealed. But above all, he knew that he would have to rebuild his life from the shards left behind. The house seemed emptier than ever when Lucas returned. The silence was now oppressive, filling every corner with an almost tangible weight. He sat down on the living room sofa, letting his body sink into the upholstery, as if the accumulated fatigue of the last few weeks had finally overwhelmed him. The conversation with Gabriel still echoed in his mind, each word a cruel reminder of what had happened. He closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts, but the anger and pain prevented him from finding any peace. In the bedroom, Emma was awake. She hadn't slept since Lucas had left. She was lying down, staring at the ceiling, while the words she had exchanged with him repeated themselves like a broken record. The look in his eyes, full of disappointment and fury, seemed to stick in her memory, a memory she knew would haunt her for a long time. She knew she had crossed a line, but she couldn't imagine how irreparably shattered it would make her feel. Lucas stood up suddenly, feeling that staying still wouldn't help him. He walked around the house, looking at the details that had gone unnoticed before, the picture frames with old photos, the marks of use on the furniture that told stories of moments shared. Now everything seemed different, as if they belonged to a life he no longer recognized. He stopped in front of one of the wedding photos. He and Emma were smiling, their gazes full of love and promise. He clenched his fists, feeling the heat of anger mix with the cold of sadness. Emma appeared in the room. She didn't say anything, but her presence was enough to fill the room with an almost palpable tension. Lucas looked at her, his eyes full of conflicting emotions, but he couldn't say anything. Words seemed insufficient to express everything she felt. She hesitated, as if waiting for him to speak first, but when the silence dragged on, she decided to take a chance. I know that apologies aren't enough. His voice was low, almost a whisper. But I need you to know that. I never wanted it to come to this. Lucas let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You never wanted it to. And yet, here we are. She swallowed dryly, the tears threatening to fall again. I'm not trying to justify anything. I just want you to understand that this wasn't about you. It was about me. About my insecurities, my weaknesses. He interrupted her, his voice firm. And that justifies what you did? Does it justify destroying everything we've built? Because, to me, that just sounds like an excuse. Emma lowered her head, unable to hold his gaze. She knew he was right. There wasn't enough justification, just a mess of bad choices that she now had to face. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to control the urge to shout. I went to talk to Gabriel, he finally said, breaking the silence. I wanted to hear from him. To know what he had to say. Emma looked up, surprised, but said nothing. He continued. He apologized, of course. He said it was a mistake, that it should never have happened. But do you know what made me most furious? The fact that he talked as if it was something small, something that could be swept under the carpet. She felt a knot forming in her stomach. I know it's hard for you to believe me now, but I want you to know that. I'm sorry. For everything. Lucas laughed humorlessly. You're sorry. That doesn't change anything, Emma. Nothing. You've broken something that may never be fixed. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Emma didn't try to argue. She knew Lucas needed that moment to let off steam, to process everything that had happened. The next morning, Lucas made the decision to leave the house. He knew he needed distance to think clearly, away from Emma, away from the memories that surrounded him at every corner. He packed a few things into a suitcase and, without saying much, informed her that he would be staying in a hotel for a while. I just need some space, he explained, his voice heavy with fatigue. I need to figure out what I'm going to do from here. Emma didn't try to stop him. She just nodded, feeling a growing emptiness as she watched him walk out the door. The house, which already seemed empty, now seemed even bigger, every room echoing his absence. Lucas, on the other hand, found temporary relief in the hotel. The impersonal space, without memories or associations, offered him a chance to breathe. He spent his days at work, immersing himself in projects as a form of distraction, but the nights were different. In the evenings, silence found him, bringing with it all the emotions he tried to avoid. It was on one of these nights that he received an unexpected message. It was from Anna, Emma's friend. She had heard about the situation and wanted to know if Lucas was okay. He hesitated before replying, but ended up agreeing to talk to her. They met in a cafe and, for the first time in weeks, Lucas felt he could speak freely. Anna listened patiently as he vented, without judging or offering unsolicited advice. In the end, she said something that stuck in Lucas' mind. You have every right to feel what you feel. But at the end of the day, it's your decision how to move forward. And yours alone. These words echoed in Lucas' mind for the next few days. He began to wonder what he really wanted. Take revenge. Try to forgive. Start again. The options seemed overwhelming, but he knew that eventually he would have to choose. Emma, for her part, was also facing her own hell. Without Lucas, she realized how much she had lost. Every detail of the house reminded her of him, of the memories they had shared, of the promises they had made. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she began to wonder if there was anything she could still do to rebuild the future. As the days passed, Lucas and Emma lived in separate worlds, but their stories were still intertwined. They both knew that their next meeting would be crucial, that the decisions they made from then on would define the course of their lives. The weight of the betrayal still hung over them, but there was something else, something that had not yet been fully revealed. The weeks passed, and the distance between Lucas and Emma seemed to grow even more. He stayed at the hotel, trying to rebuild some kind of routine that didn't depend on the memories she had destroyed. However, the pain persisted, a constant presence that he couldn't ignore. Emma, on the other hand, spent her days in a house that felt less and less like a home. Lucas' absence was a stark reminder of everything she had lost. One day, Lucas received an unexpected message from Gabriel. Despite hesitating, he decided to hear what his brother had to say. They arranged to meet in a discreet cafe. Gabriel arrived first, and Lucas found him sitting in a corner, looking more tense and vulnerable than he had ever seen him. "Thank you for coming," said Gabriel, his voice hesitant. "I know I have no right to ask for anything after what I've done, but I needed to talk to you." Lucas crossed his arms, keeping a cool posture. "Then talk." Gabriel took a deep breath. I've ruined everything. Not just with you, but with my own life. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe jealousy, maybe insecurity. But in the end, it was pure stupidity. I wanted something you had because I thought it would make me feel better. But it only made me realize how empty I really am. Lucas remained silent, his brother's words echoing in his mind. He didn't want to feel empathy, but he couldn't help but recognize a piece of truth in what Gabriel was saying. You didn't just destroy what I had with Emma. You destroyed the trust we had as brothers. That's something I don't know if I can forgive. Gabriel bowed his head, defeated. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that. I'm trying to be a better person. I've been to therapy, I've distanced myself from everything that led me to this point. I'm trying to figure out how to fix what's left of my life. Lucas didn't answer immediately. He just stood up, put his hands in his pockets and looked at Gabriel. I hope you can. But don't count on me. He left without looking back, leaving Gabriel alone in the cafe. As he walked through the streets, Lucas felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He had said what he needed to say, but he knew that the wound left by his brother would still take a long time to heal. On the other side, Emma was also making her own decisions. After weeks of reflection and loneliness, she finally decided that she needed to move on, even if it meant accepting that her life would never be the same. She wrote a letter to Lucas, a last attempt to express what she couldn't put into words face to face. In the letter, she admitted her mistakes, but also explained how she had lost control of herself, how she had let herself get carried away by insecurities and momentary desires. She apologized again, but didn't beg for his forgiveness. Instead, she wished him happiness, even if it was without her. When Lucas received the letter, he sat for hours, staring at the words Emma had written. He felt a mixture of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of closure. For the first time in a long time, he was able to take a deep breath without feeling the crushing weight of betrayal. In the end, he decided that he needed a definitive change. He asked for a transfer at work and moved to a different city, where he could start afresh. The past was still a shadow, but he was determined not to let it define the future. Emma, for her part, decided to sell the house. She knew she couldn't go on living in a place that constantly reminded her of everything she had lost. She moved into a small apartment and started working on a project she had always put aside, something that finally made her feel like she was rebuilding her life independently. A few months later, Lucas met someone new. A woman with a light energy and a sincere smile, who made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt for years. The relationship started slowly, without haste, but for the first time Lucas felt that there was hope. Emma also found some level of peace. Although she still felt Lucas' absence, she began to understand that she needed to find herself before she could be with someone else again. The road ahead was lonely, but she was willing to face it. Gabriel, for his part, remained distant. He was still wrestling with his own demons, trying to rebuild something from the ruins of his choices. He knew that Lucas' forgiveness might never come, but he was determined to become someone better, even if only for himself. Their story took different turns, but the lessons remained. Lucas found the strength to start again, Emma began to heal from the inside out, and Gabriel learned the price of his choices. Each of them carried the scars of what had happened, but also the possibility of a different future. Now that you've made it this far, tell us what you thought of this story. Your opinion is important and we want to know how you felt when you heard every detail. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow other stories like this one. And remember, we don't support any kind of betrayal here. Our stories show how these choices can destroy lives and relationships. See you next time.